question, how much sleep do we need, is interesting. And you can look at guidelines. So the National Sleep Foundation, for example, recommends that adults get 79 hours of sleep per evening. And anecdotally, you hear people say, yeah, I get by fine on less sleep than that. But if you look at genetic variation in the amount of sleep that we need, then there's a rare mutation in a gene called DEC2. And people that carry this mutation have the shorter sleep phenotype that we've seen so far. And they need about 6.2 hours of sleep each evening, so 6 hours and 12 minutes. So that's probably much more sleep than people might have anticipated if they need less sleep than everybody else. And various things affect how much sleep we need on an ongoing basis. And an important point to understand is that whereas the guidelines recommend 79 hours, what's right for you is something that only you can find out for yourself. And also the amount of sleep that you need is going to vary based on things like how much physical activity you're doing, whether you have an infection, all sorts of different things. Also, sleep disorders will affect it. So, for example, if you're very heavy and you have obstructive sleep apnea, in which the upper airway intermittently collapses during sleep, then your sleep will fragment. So your sleep will become less efficient. And for a given amount of time in bed each evening, you'll spend less time actually asleep, in which case you'd have to spend more time in bed to get the same total amount of sleep each evening. So practically speaking, if we think about how much sleep somebody needs and how you can work that out for yourself, I think that you begin by tracking your own sleep, removing the brakes on what could reduce sleep. So for example, caffeine, alcohol, and so on. And then, if possible, minimizing your use of alarm clocks in the morning and getting to bed on time. Once you've done those things and you've started to pay off any existing sleep debt that you have, you can start to work out how much sleep you actually need.
So you'd recommend that, or you'd advise that if you feel rested, you probably have had enough sleep.
Possibly. What I would say is that an issue with prolonged sleep restriction, and when I say sleep restriction, what I'm referring to is getting some sleep, but less sleep than you absolutely need, is that there's a discrepancy between how impaired we feel we are and how impaired we objectively are. So there was a guy called Hans van Dongen. He did some research under the mentorship of David Dinges back in 2003. And they did some really nice experiments in which they didn't let people get enough sleep over a prolonged period of time. And what they found was that if they restricted people's sleep from one night to the next, people's performance almost got linearly worse over the period of a couple of weeks. But the people didn't feel like they kept performing worse. They felt like they got worse initially, and then after a period of time, their performance hit some threshold at which it stabilized. So some people, I think, aren't aware of how good they can feel when they're fully rested. They're so used to not getting enough sleep that they might think that that is just how they normally feel. But then if they go through a period in which they really try to emphasize getting better sleep, then after a while they realize that they've spent the last few years performing at a suboptimal level.